All right, Rabotai. Rabbi Noah Kitty has written Thank You, Anti-Semites, a short history of how Jews have risen to the challenge for 3,000 years and counting. And it's published by Simu Lev. Now, Thank You, Anti-Semites is, besides being an explanation of that arresting title, is also an informally written history of the Jewish people, very concise, beautifully footnoted. The research that created this is 104-page book, is extensive, it's staggering. So what I would like to do is turn over the microphone to my colleague, Rabbi Noah Kitty, author of this wonderful book, and let her talk about it for a while. Then she will allow me to ask some questions. And if there's time toward the end, we can open up the floor to anybody else who has questions. So, Rabbi Kitty, it's all yours.
Thank you. Thank you. So first, I want to thank everyone who took the time out of your day to join us this evening and welcome you to my first. It's my first, so please be gentle. Sharing of my book. So, and a special shout out not only to my rabbinic colleagues, but to Deb Barcel, who I have not laid eyes on in over 30 years. And you look tremendous. So happy to see you. What propelled me to write the book was truly October 7th. And I was astounded, shocked, horrified, thrown back on my heels, and really, honestly, didn't know how to process my feelings. There were several urgings of violence and revenge. It came, it passed, but I want to acknowledge that that certainly happened. And also, possibly because I retired almost 2 years ago, I had some time on my hands. And quite honestly, when I was sitting and trying to figure out what to do, the title actually came to me to say, well, you think I'm going to cry over this, and I'm not going to cry. I'm going to say thank you, because you forced us, you anti-Semites forced us to be better than we ever could have imagined, only to survive your onslaughts. So I have 5 main points that I outlined in my book. The first is, again, to provide a new perspective on anti-Semitism. It's truly counterintuitive to say thank you, but, in one way of looking at it, one perspective is that anti-Semites inadvertently made Jews the most responsible, strategic, imaginative, and resilient people on earth. And rather than focusing solely on victimhood, I suggest we see anti-Semitism as a friction that strengthened our identity, our unity, and our achievement. Continuing on the idea of Jewish unity, we've certainly achieved it through external pressure. Anti-Semitism has, again, paradoxically, served as a unifying force for Jews throughout history. Without anti-Semites uniting Jews around our Jewishness, it's possible, and I suggest, that we could have imploded a long time ago, as evidenced by the historical divisions among our communities, such as those between the kingdoms of Judah and Israel. There's also the entirety of Hellenism and so forth. The other point is really dare I say it, a Reconstructionist approach, seeing Judaism as a civilization, that Jewish identity extends very much beyond just a religion, that being Jewish is not contingent on religious belief or practice. A person can be a perfectly fine Jew and not believe a theological word about Judaism. Now, there might be people who disagree with me. I'm okay with that. We're Jewish. We disagree with each other. But in my world, as long as you don't accept some other deity as your personal savior, and you do identify as Jewish, what that contains is very broad. Further, Judaism does not insist that our conception of God is the only correct one. Now, why is that? Well, the next point, the fallacy of a single truth. My text challenges the notion that there is only one objective truth, particularly in matters of belief. I argue that human perspectives are inherently subjective and incomplete, especially regarding the infinite, and that anti-Semitism often stems from people insisting that their beliefs are the only valid ones. Finally, I make the point of Jewish resilience and achievement. I contend that anti-Semitism has motivated us to excel in everything we do. They've made us try harder at whatever we put our hand towards. This constant pressure to prove worth in host communities has led to significant contributions across various fields and a commitment, a real commitment, to make the world a better place. Moving on. So in the beginning of my book, I asked, who needs another book on anti-Semitism when so many exist? But unlike those with, and forgive me, lachrymose descriptions, this work aims to help readers feel better about being Jewish and be less concerned about the negativity directed at Jewish people. This perspective is not about minimizing suffering at all, but about recognizing how external pressure has shaped Jewish achievement and identity. As I note, if the anti-Semites thought Jews or Zionists were slow, stupid, and ineffective, there would be no reason to bother with us. One of the first points I make is that anti-Semitism is a fact of Jewish existence. We don't have the option of making it go away. Our option really lies on how we determine to respond to it. If we had lived in places where there was no friction, there would not have been any reason to develop our resources to respond to it. And truly, anti-Semites have made us try harder at whatever we put our hand towards. If we were students, we tried to be better learners. If we were teachers, we tried to have our students be more successful, because the lights were always shining on us. We were always being judged. In whatever we did, we could turn neither to the left nor to the right without someone making a comment about it. Whatever we did, we tried to raise our level. In this, we even tried to make the world better for everyone, because a rising tide lifts all boats. Intertwined with this is my fundamental Jewish belief that there is no problem that we cannot solve. I believe it when Torah says that we, not just Jews, but human beings, are just a little less than God. We have eaten from the fruit of the tree of knowledge, and we have acquired all the wisdom that it contains. The Jewish response to anti-Semitism demonstrates our human capacity to transform obstacles into opportunities. When faced with exclusion from certain professions or societies, for example, Jews didn't surrender, but instead created new paths forward. We developed solutions where none existed before. This exemplifies the human capacity to overcome seemingly insurmountable problems through creativity, persistence, and innovation. To repeat, anti-Semitism has paradoxically served as a unifying force for Jews throughout history. Without external threats, Jewish communities might have remained divided. Without them uniting Jews around our Jewishness, we probably would have imploded a long time ago. Further, they reinforced our idea of Jewish peoplehood by treating all Jews as one entity. They've declared Jewish people are one. No other people are considered similarly unified. If there was a Jew in danger anywhere, it was a problem for Jews everywhere, and there was almost always a Jew in trouble somewhere. It reflects our principle, all Israel is responsible for one another. This collective responsibility created a global support network that transcended geographic and linguistic boundaries. Now, I believe there's a Jewish approach to truth and religious plurality, that Judaism recognizes the limitations of human understanding of the infinite, because Judaism accepts that we do not, indeed cannot, understand all there is to understand about God. We know it is possible, likely, in fact, that we do not have a complete picture. This goes to my idea that I believe God is infinite and human beings are not infinite. Therefore, the finite cannot have a complete idea of the infinite because the infinite is beyond our capacity. So to say that we have the only and the best answer really requires that we accept a little more humility of our finiteness. Judaism does not believe that Jews have the only keys to heaven. There are many routes to holiness, and there are many paths to salvation. The next point I make is the establishment of Israel as validation of Zionism. The creation of Israel represents a profound rejection of the anti-Semitic narrative of eternal Jewish wandering. Israel's success challenges centuries of theological certainty about Jewish fate. The state of Israel has been one of the most astounding and shocking accomplishments in the past 2,000 years. The world definitely is not accustomed to the idea of free and independent Jews, nor accustomed to the idea that Jews no longer need their permission to establish a home for ourselves. Jews never gave up the idea of returning home, as can be seen from our liturgy and holy books. And what I believe the anti-Semitism coming from, or historically coming from, the Christian world is different from that coming from the Arab and Islamic world, is that Islam never knew a Jew that was their political equal. It just never existed. Wherever a Muslim lived, Jews were technically and legally, at best, second class. And that was the best we could hope for, because at least when we were designated second class, we had some legal protection. If we lived in a place where the status of dhimmi didn't exist, then what could happen, and what tragically often happened, was that a Muslim could really treat a Jew any way they wanted because we had no rights. We had none. We were only permitted to live where the ruler said we could. And when the ruler changed their mind, there went the permission. So for Jews to establish an independent political entity smack in the middle of Arabia has, I believe, shocked them to the point where they can't accept it. And in my mind, it's not unlike the end of the Civil War in the United States, where all of a sudden, between Tuesday and Wednesday, Blacks were slaves, and Wednesday they were, theoretically the political equal of white folk. And we know how well that was then and still is now accepted in certain circles. So it's very hard for people to change their minds about who has that kind of power and authority. I continue to state that anti-Semites will not change their minds through logical arguments. We are unable to stop anti-Semites from hating Jews. It is their truth, and because they look for proof and reassurance that they are correct, that is exactly what they find. Therefore, freedom comes from recognizing our own power rather than expecting others to change. And I actually got this idea from working in the Black community, and I would hear folks say, white people suck. And I'm like, yeah, they do, and it's a given. They're not going to change their mind just because you want them to. And anti-Semites to me are the same. They're just not going to change their minds because we want them to. There are no logical arguments against it because there are no logical arguments for it. It's not based on logic. Therefore, do not wait for the people who hate and harm you to stop, because they will not. Your life is ultimately your responsibility. Unlike animals who were created finished, meaning a goldfish and an elephant will never be more than a goldfish or an elephant. They might be smaller or larger, they might be slower or quicker, they might be able to reproduce, they might be especially cheerful or morose, but they will never be more than a goldfish and an elephant. For human beings, however, we were created unfinished, and it's up to us to choose for ourselves how we want to finish, how we want to continue, as we say in the ongoing act of creation. We are not done. I believe that human evolution has not stopped, and we have the potential and, in fact, the responsibility to continue to evolve consciously. We can absolutely rise above our origins to become what we will ourselves to be. The perspective I offer in my book challenges us to rethink how we understand adversity. Rather than seeing anti-Semitism solely as an obstacle to overcome, I invite us to recognize how it has paradoxically strengthened our identity, our achievement, and ultimately led to the realization of Zionism. This is not at all, and please, not at all, to minimize the real pain and the real suffering caused by anti-Semitism throughout history. Rather, it is to highlight the remarkable human capacity to transform challenges into catalysts for growth. My message extends beyond Jewish experience to universal truth. There is no problem we cannot solve when we take responsibility for our own destiny. Even in the face of hatred, we retain the power to define ourselves and to create meaning from adversity. Thank you for your attention, and I welcome your questions and reflections.
Okay, Noah, I have a few, there's so many places for me to hook questions into the things you've said, but let me start here. Christian theology posits that since the Jews knew Jesus personally, that Jesus lived among us, and we still rejected him as the Messiah. And for that reason, the curse of homelessness was imposed upon the Jews. The idea of the wandering Jew, which is not just a houseplant. It is actually a aspect of Christian theology. When Jews suffered, this supported that aspect of Christian belief. The Jewish suffering was justified. So it must have been a baffling shock when in the 20th century, the Jews came up with a permanent independent national home and a powerful military. Would you comment about that shock to the Christian sensibility?
Sure. And it is a not just an interesting question, but it's still remains a real challenge, because historically there are those in the Christian community, and it has many iterations, as we might say, who still believe that somehow Jews were wrong to, it's our stubborn to have the chutzpah to go against what they believe was a theological truth. And it touches on, again, theological history and modern geopolitical developments. The Catholic doctrine of papal infallibility, which is essentially one of the things you referred to, was formally defined at the First Vatican Council not until 1870, though the concept existed earlier. But there wasn't a specific infallible papal declaration that Jews must wander eternally. In other words, there was never anything actually written down. It was more of a, and it was a continuation of the curse of the Jews. The notion of Jewish wandering developed as a theological interpretation across Christian theology more broadly, based on the idea that Jewish dispersion was divine punishment for rejection of Jesus. So that was part of it. In other words, it was more commentary than it was Torah, as it were.
I see.
As you mentioned, when Israel was established in 1948, this created a tremendous theological challenge for Christians, not only in the Muslim world, where they was like, how can this be? This never was. It never was. How could this be? We're simply not prepared to see these people. Not, and again, it wasn't necessarily a objection to Jews living in their midst. It was Jews living as their political equal. That, ixnay on the Jew hate. I mean, it wasn't supposed to happen. But it did absolutely within the church force a theological reconsideration within many of the Christian denominations. So, and I had to write this down because I didn't know it off the top of my head. The Catholic Church's position absolutely evolved, especially following the Second Vatican Council. We might remember back in the early 60s, it was 62 to 65, with the document Nostra Aetate. And hopefully I pronounced that reasonably correct. It rejected anti-Semitism and also the notion that Jews were collectively responsible for Jesus's death. And it took a few years, but in 1993, the Vatican formally established diplomatic relations with Israel, further acknowledging the legitimacy of the Jewish state. So, so that's how I would answer that. There are, of course, those who, maybe didn't read the Second Vatican Council. There's a community of Catholics who don't accept the Second Vatican Council, even to the point of claiming that a true pope has not been elected since 1958. So, there is not unity in that community either.
Okay. Then let me ask you this. Christianity and Islam are both missionary religions. Their adherents believe that they must convert others to their own religion, either because it will please God or to save the souls of those that they're converting. And Judaism, as you pointed out in your book, does not seek converts for the reasons you explained. I once heard, I don't remember if I heard it in person or secondhand, a complaint by a Christian who said that we Jews obviously think that we are superior because we don't want to share our religion with those inferior others. Do you think that that's a factor that supports prejudice against Jews?
Well, I think if you're willing to entertain prejudice against Jews, almost any reason will suffice. So that's A. B, I think it's just wrong to say that Jews are not willing to share our religion. There's all kinds of books available in a wide range of languages that explain Judaism, that are titled, if you're considering conversion. There are countless translations of Torah, and for anyone who's truly interested in exploring Judaism, there are such wonderful resources as Sepharia, which are accessible to anybody with a computer. So to say that we don't want to share our religion is wrong. We share freely by not requiring people to be Jewish. Again, is our understanding that God's a pretty big subject, and however much we might understand about God, we probably don't have absolutely every idea. And within the infinite, there's room for various opinions. There have been times in Jewish history, not recently, but in my book, I point out the Himyarites kingdom in Yemen, where one of the Yemenite leaders converted to Judaism and converted his whole community. And as the story goes, he, the passion of the convert, as we sometimes say, caused him to attack a local Christian community. And as a result, European Christians sent an army, and that was the end of that Jewish kingdom. So forcing conversion truly never worked out well for us, and it just wasn't a direction that any of our leaders, thankfully, decided to pursue.
Okay, just as you point out that it is a mistake to see Jews as one entity, as one monolith, it's also, I have learned from your book, a big mistake to look on the Islamic world as one single entity. I was surprised in a number of spots in the book, but I picked out two short things that I'd like to contrast with each other,
Sure.
both of which were new to me. One refers to the Jews living in Iran
Mm-hmm.
under Shia rule, and you say, Shia Islam places a great emphasis on ritual purity, so that even a step of one's foot in the same place as a non-Muslim renders a Muslim impure. This resulted in extreme restriction of movements for Jews who could not enter the public baths or go outside during rain or snow, in case the water that touched them trickled down to touch a Muslim. So there's that. But also on page 38, this is about Morocco. A varying series of fortune in Morocco, but Morocco came under Nazi authority during World War II. And the hundreds of thousands of Jews in Morocco were saved from extermination by the very brave intercession by Morocco's Sultan, Mohammed V. And you go on to say, at the end of the war, there were over 250,000 Jews in the country. By 1968, only 60,000 remained as they immigrated to Israel, France, and the US. And then the Six-Day War comes, and that increases tensions. And yet, as of today, Morocco's king supports a senior Jewish advisor, and Jews have representation in commerce, politics, and culture. So those are really two sides of Jewish life in the Islamic world. It's not by any means uniform.
Correct. Correct. It I believe reflects the cultural differences in those two countries. I mean, if you want to go back to Iran, as we all remember, it was King Cyrus, the Persian, who permitted Jews, well, it was Babylonia at the time, but who permitted Jews to return to Israel and rebuild the temple. So, depending on who's in charge and depending on how they feel and depending on what their motivations are, Jews rarely did well, but certainly our fortunes waxed and waned over the 2,000 years plus under Arab Muslim rule. I mean, one of the things I point out, and it was a surprise to me because I didn't know this, maybe was absent that day in rabbinical school, but Jews were in Medina almost 1,000 years before Muhammad was. And, not that it was necessarily a Jewish town, but there were plenty of Jews there. There had been a long-term Jewish community. And one of the things that I'm hoping that someone else may explore is what was really the Judaism that these Jews practiced since, they left after the destruction of the two kingdoms. So I think that's a huge question. It might be impossible to find out because tragically, subsequently, the Jewish communities in Medina, as well as the Khaybar, which I also mentioned, were essentially annihilated. And maybe Larry is aware of some records from that place in time, but I couldn't find them. So not so much. So, we know that we were there because the Muslims said we were. So, and it helps explain how Jews became such an international people because, when you're kicked out of your home and you don't want to just give up the ship, as it were, you go somewhere else where you can. And that's what we did. We went where we could. We lived where we could. And when we couldn't live there anymore, we went somewhere else.
Okay. Medieval Christian Europe was generally a pretty grim place for the Jews, as we
Yeah.
all know. It was a little bit better at the end of the medieval period in non-Catholic Europe. But what I wanted to point out, another thing in your book, was that sometimes anti-Semitism followed the Jews even to the New World. So
Yes.
why don't you tell us a little bit about Peter Stuyvesant?
Um, uh, Folks who are aware of early American history or early history of New York may remember that before New York was New York, it was New Amsterdam. Um, as a result of the Jews being not Jews of businesses in Amsterdam to travel and as part of the um, West, I'm blanking on the name.
The Dutch West
The
India Company?
There you go.
There you go.
Thank you. Because Amsterdam had been so welcoming to Jews as a result of it accepting Protestantism, and at the time not needing to blame Jews because Protestants were trying to distinguish themselves from the Catholics. So Jews were absolutely able to establish themselves fairly well in that community. As a result, the Jews went to Recife in Brazil because the Inquisition was chasing them all over the world. So they went to Recife. Unfortunately, the Spanish took over, the Inquisition followed them, and the Jews had to get out of Dodge, and they went to New Amsterdam. When they reached the shores, Peter Stuyvesant did not literally want them to get off the boat, and the Jews were able to get a message back to the East India Company requesting permission to get off the boat and to establish a community. Now, again, there were 23 Jewish families. We're not talking about hordes of immigrants. And they were absolutely self-sufficient, which is something that Stuyvesant insisted on. Said, fine, they can get off the boat, they can build some homes, but they can never, ever, ever look to the wider community for any kinds of support. And what I pointed out was, fine, we will absolutely be self-sufficient and we won't look to you for help because we know help will not come from that quarter. So that's the famous Peter Stuyvesant story. And also, ironically, as I point out also, Martin Luther, folks may know that when he started his Reformation, he wanted Jews to convert because he thought he had the last word on what it was, what truth was. And he said, the reason that Jews aren't converting is because we're so mean to them. But if we're nice to them, they'll convert because, we'll be nice to them. And for a while, he actually was very open and compassionate towards Jews. However, when that did not result in widespread Jewish conversion to Lutheranism, he decided to turn the other cheek, as it were, and became one of our fiercest critics. However, if it wasn't for the Reformation, then Amsterdam would never be Protestant, and the Jews would never be able to establish a foothold and become part of, at that time, and the Amazon of its day, the East India Company, and never would have gotten permission to get off the boat at New Amsterdam. So thank you, Martin Luther.
All right, I'm going to wind up my role in this with an old famous joke, a famous dark Jewish joke. From the 1930s, the joke is that there was a rabbi in Germany who was sitting on a park bench and he is reading the Nazi newspaper, Die Stürmer. He's reading the Nazi newspaper. And one of his congregants comes over to him, is astonished, and says, "Rabbi, how can you be reading that Nazi rag? It's filled with the worst kind of libels. Are you a masochist, or, God forbid, a self-hating Jew?" And the rabbi answers, "No, to the contrary. When I read the Jewish papers, all I read about are pogroms and riots in Palestine and assimilation in America. But when I read Der Stürmer, I can see that the Jews control all the banks, we pull all the strings in the art world and cinema, and we're on the verge of taking over the entire world." Made me feel a whole lot better. And just because that joke is not confined to the 1930s, as recently as 2021, we have Marjorie Taylor Greene stating that the Jews control the weather with our Jewish space lasers, which has launched an entire genre of comedy for which we're grateful to Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene. All right, there are questions. Talia, where should we start?
I think we should start with Larry, who has 2 questions in the chat. Larry, do you want to ask them yourself, or do you want me to read them?
Well, you're muted, so that might make your decision for you.
I'm incapable of speaking while I'm muted, as I am. I'm happy if you want to read them. That's fine with me, or I can read them. It doesn't matter to me, Talia. I actually had a third point I wanted to raise. During my tenure in Toronto, I was invited by the school system to teach about racism and rejection of persons in the multicultural world of Canadian life. And over again, the denial that there could be anything like anti-Semitism was spoken by literally hundreds of teachers from 140 different countries who said, "You folks are all white. You could never possibly have encountered the problems we had." I thought the attitude was exaggerated and perhaps a contact disease of some kind, until I was put on a panel. We had an Aboriginal shaman, a Catholic priest, a Protestant minister, and a Jewish rabbi, as they labeled it. And the question that one of the 1,000 Muslim women immigrants in the audience raised to learn about the different religions in Canada included a question about conversion to Judaism. That was exactly what you were discussing. And the response, when I said, well, for historical reasons, we have never pressed conversion nor sought conversion. And the response from the person to whom the women handed their little kvitla with questions on them, he was shocked. He said, "Well, from our perspective, that means that you Jews secretly know your religion is inferior, duplicitous, deceptive, destructive, contrary to the truth of what Allah wants in the world, and therefore you are justifiably pursued as the duplicitous people you are." And listening to that in front of 1,000 voiceless women, new immigrants to Canada, I realized that Noah's brilliant comment a week or so ago about how we should be exchanging educators. So Jews educate Muslims, and Muslims can teach Jews. And that way they will come to learn the boundaries and limits within and the histories of cultural assumptions. I thought it was a brilliant comment, Noah, and the rest of the stuff I raised, you can ignore. But I just thought that was the linchpin moment. Can we open up to listening to the other's historical narrative in a way that doesn't out of hand dismiss it? I'd never been publicly dismissed by 1,000 Muslim women in my life, and I pray to God I never have it happen again.
Thank you. Talia, who's next in line?
Well, I think Samach is next, and then I'm not sure if Shoshana Kaminsky had a question after that.
Thank you, Noah. I deeply enjoy the premise of your book. I get, like many of us get multiple emails a day, but how we're being pursued by anti-Semites, and it is refreshing just to read. Thank you. Just positive. Let's it's this is keeping us together, and that perspective is such a is one that makes one think and just be more assertive about one's identity. So yeah, I enjoyed this. Also, the arc of history is so strange. I mean, we were in I'm a scholar of much a period of the biblical and early rabbinic period, and we were a militaristic society then, meaning right after we were among the most feared mercenaries after the destruction of the first temple. And then we we were a very rebellious people against the Romans. Multiple rebellions that were quashed down and were quashed out of us. And then we remained. And then we then we were pacifists for for another 1,800 years or so. And now we're back to reasserting our identity. Hopefully, having learned the lessons of the first time we were militaristic. So it is really I like to see how the arc of history over here, starting in a little earlier even than you're doing.
Excuse me. One of the things I learned that in the late biblical period, we actually sent a squadron of Jewish fighters to help Egypt.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah. We were involved in the Greek Persian wars. We were mercenaries all over. Yes,
all over. So
that's why we mounted so many rebellions, because we had so many people who were militarily trained.
Right. And one of the ways I think that Jews really became so imaginative was that for almost 2,000 years, we couldn't literally fight back. For a Jew to raise their hand against a Christian or a Muslim would be not only death for them, but probably death for their family and maybe the entire town. So resistance, we hesitated to even say the word resistance, but resistance had to come in a different form. So how do you resist without violence? And, we weren't Quakers. It wasn't about turning the other cheek. It was really, as much as the non-Jews wanted to put us away in ghettos, we appreciated being put away in ghettos, because at least then we could walk the streets and not worry about having, being pushed off the sidewalk, because we lived among other Jews. And it was within those smaller Jewish communities that we learned, who were the mighty among us. The mighty among us were our teachers. The mighty among us were our creative people. It was not the Hebrew hammer. That guy was dangerous, because we couldn't present in that kind of physical threat to the non-Jewish community around us. And in my mind, it made us genius. Now, we've forgotten a bit of that, and I went to some pains to point out that when we did try to forcibly reject military challenge, we were schmeiced. I mean, the Romans did a really good job. I mean, they essentially wiped us out. Absolutely. In Jerusalem, Jews couldn't even go into Jerusalem. It was ironically Saladin who let us go back to Jerusalem.
Again.
Yeah, and where was that other community? There, and I mentioned in Yemen that wiped out, just erased, and that was that. Oh, after Muhammad conquered Medina, he went on to the Khaybar, which was also home to a fairly sizable Jewish merchant class of people. And again, the Jewish tribes, we patterned ourselves similar to our Arab neighbors, so we were tribes. I thought the tribes were the 12 tribes, and that was it for Jewish tribes. But no, there were any number of Arab Jewish tribes or Jewish tribes in the Arab world for hundreds of years. And again, when we tried to push back, it ended very badly. And to the point where I read, again, in my sources, which were only English because I do not speak Arabic, even today, the Palestinians, one of their battle cries is "Remember the Khaybar." And I'm like, it was 1,000 years ago. I mean, come on. But it is a symbol, at least to some in the Muslim world, of Jewish failure. So they remember it a lot more than we do.
I mean, hopefully we've learned the lesson now, but don't kick a giant, and so
Don't poke the bear. Please don't poke the bear.
Yeah.
Let's go to Shoshana Kaminsky.
Thank you, Shoshana Hantman. First of all, Noah, I'm just really amazed at your breadth of historic knowledge and just how much you've learned. Yes, and so I don't have that breadth of history that others, I think, on this Zoom do, and so I'm, first of all, I have to say I'm a bit discouraged by this premise that there's nothing we can really do about anti-Semitism. It's just a reality, and so the best revenge is living well, basically. But I'm wondering about this phenomenon that we're seeing now of Jews acting in ways that I would consider to be anti-Semitic, and whether that's something that has any historical precedent that you found, or whether that's a new phenomenon.
Well, the phenomena of Jews working against other Jews is tragically not new. You can go back again to the dual kingdoms of Israel and Judah. They were not friends. I mean, there's a reason there were two of them and not one of them. And I even read that the belief that there at one point was a unified kingdom and only later it split into two. It's like, well, it's, some members of the jury are still out on that one. And again, if you look towards to the Hellenistic period and the whole concept of zealots and Judah Maccabee, I mean, we've really turned that story around. Jews were absolutely killing other Jews at that period. And as most of us know in Talmud, when it asks my Hanukkah, like, what's Hanukkah? It's like, well, it really was a story of a military victory. And we said, you know, don't poke the bear. You know, we're under Roman authority. Let's make it about the light. You know, that'll be a much better story. So to your point, Jews have fought Jews. And you know, we need to be careful about believing the press of our oppressors, meaning that all you Jews are the same. It's like, nah, not really. You know, we're not. But thank you for encouraging it, so that when, you know, Jew fights another Jew, we think it's a horrible thing and should be remedied, as opposed to something expected or even anticipated, which it should also be. But it's still horrific and a tragedy. And you know, before we were Jews, we were people, and you know, people, as I mentioned, we're not yet perfect. We're working towards it. So, but that is the perfection that we're working towards.
Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for attending. The book is this backwards?
No, it's coming out forwards.
It's amazing. It's something I'll never understand. It looks backwards to me.
Oh, okay.
The book is Thank You, Anti-Semites, A Short History of How Jews Have Risen to the Challenge for 3,000 Years and Counting. Thank you all very much. I hope this is the first of many book launches for this book and the first book of many books from Rabbi Noah Kitty. Thank you for writing it. It is a valuable book, concise, easy to read, which is miraculous. I say this as someone who read history for 4 years in college. They generally are not written this easy to read. So I appreciate that very much. Thank you, everybody, and we hope to see you at the next Beit Kaplan event, which you will surely hear about. Be well.
Thank you. Thank you.